Hi, I'm Dick Corn.
And I'm Matthew Continetti.
Together we're Blogging Heads TV. Hey, it's great to be on with you, Matt. I don't think we've ever done this together, although we used to do a TV show together.
We did, before it was abruptly canceled, before its time. I guess TV couldn't handle us on the screen together, David. It was too much.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of intensity there, but the problem was the local station realized they could make more money showing Entertainment Tonight, the weekend edition, than they could showing us and others talking about politics. And so who can blame them?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned this. I just watched the 1976 film Network last night, and I've never seen this movie. I bet you're mad as hell.
I'm
mad as hell, and I can't take it anymore. Absolutely. And, I'd never seen the film, but
oh my goodness.
It's amazing to me, actually, how it really was a prophetic movie.
Yeah, for years I've been meaning to write this piece, which you're free to do, in that everything that movie predicted that seemed so outlandish at the time when I remember watching it and saying, oh my goodness, they're really pushing the envelope here. All that has happened and more. I mean, they kind of lowballed their estimate of what the future media world would look like.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was fantastic. But it is good to be here with you, and I guess we'll get started today talking about the front runner for the Republican nomination, John McCain.
I am still puzzled over this whole to-do about conservatives and John McCain. NPR has been doing a series this week speaking to such notable conservative thinkers as Glenn Beck, CNN talk show host, who are just, teeing off on the guy and making it sound like he is the worst thing ever to happen to the conservative movement. And I understand the differences on some issues, immigration and so on, but what I don't get is, of anybody who was on the Republican presidential horizon this past year, he was the only one of them who did any heavy lifting when it came to the number one issue for conservatives, which I thought was the war in Iraq. And he got no love for that. I mean, talk about, ingrates. It seems that the people who have been beating the drum for the war have just been its biggest advocates. A lot of them have given him no credit at all for being on the front lines and actually working the issue. What gives?
I'll say this. I think there are plenty of conservatives out there, Beltway conservatives, even some talk radio conservatives, who never really liked the war in Iraq to begin with and kind of did want it to go away. I mean, there's that Grover Norquist quote that's been around for a few years now, which is that, if Iraq is in the rearview mirror in any given election, then the Republicans will do well. But if it's in the windshield, if you're looking ahead down the road for their involvement in Iraq, Republicans will do poorly. And there was a moment there, I think, after those 6 elections where the Republican Party at large and even a lot of conservative kind of opinion elites internalized that argument, thinking that, Iraq was going downhill in 2006, the Republicans lost Congress, we need to end our involvement there. Of course, Bush bucked all of that advice and kind of adopted the strategy that McCain had been advocating since 2003. Now the situation's changed, but I think there's still a lot of kind of reluctance on the part of the Republican Party to even tout the successes in Iraq over the past year in terms of containing violence. So he's not getting any credit for that. And really, I think, fundamentally, a lot of conservatives have not a political problem with John McCain. They have a personal problem with John McCain.
So this is like going back to high school.
It's going back to high school.
That's my theory is life doesn't much evolve past high school.
Right. No, it is. It's a high school cafeteria. John McCain spends too much time over at the Democrats' table.
Oh my goodness!
He makes friends. He makes friends with the Democrats over at that table, and sometimes he throws food at the Republicans' table. He doesn't do that so much anymore. But the Republicans at their table, like any high schooler, they hold a grudge.
The fact that he's the quarterback of the football team doesn't seem to matter.
No, not at all. And so there is, I think, kind of a personal critique of McCain out there. They don't like his personality. They don't like his temperament. They think he's too self-righteous. And I think a lot of this has a small kernel of truth.
Well, listen, the guy has a volcanic temper. He's very difficult to work with. I know I'm writing a story about some people who were talking to him about a policy issue not too long ago, and they went in, 20 groups went in to meet with him, and his first words out of his mouth practically were, "I'm right, you're wrong. What is there to talk about?"
Right.
Ideologically, all ideology aside, that doesn't really endear you to people on your side or the other side.
But, I want to ask you something. The way that you framed this question I thought was pretty interesting. What the problems with the conservative base and the media covering this story. Has there ever been a case, or why is it that we never talk about the a Democratic candidate's problems with the liberal base?
Well, we have in the past, when there have been. Bill Clinton, and running in '92 as a DLC leader, there was a lot of talk about the factions within the warring factions within the Democratic Party. You had that throughout, a lot through the '70s and '80s. You had, the fight in 1980 between Jimmy Carter and Teddy Kennedy, and it just seems, that after 8 years of Bush, this is, having your opposition run the country for 8 years really concentrates the mind. And a lot of the old battles that divided the Democrats in the past, that would have separated base from perhaps a front runner, have largely evaporated. And a year or two back, I thought there might have been a tremendous civil war within the Democratic Party over the issue of Iraq, when it looked like Hillary Clinton was not for disengagement. But she, very slowly, in preparation for her run, moved in that direction. So there was no real debate about Iraq amongst the Democratic leaders. Now, had there been one, and I think John Edwards certainly was trying to make one that didn't really exist, you would have seen, I think, this alienation. But all the candidates, by and large, leading candidates were all pretty acceptable to the base. But that's not always been true in the past. It just, the last, cycle or two, the Democrats have maybe been more hungry and more, and I think, given what's happened in terms of, court appointments, the war in Iraq, and tax cuts that every Democrat hates, they've all realized that whatever differences there are between them, they don't really amount to a hill of beans, and there's no reason not to like, any of these front runners. I mean, that was the big difference this year. The Democrats had a hard time picking a candidate they liked, while the Republicans had a hard time picking a candidate they hated, or that they didn't hate. They're finding something that they didn't hate was the goal for a lot of Republicans.
Yeah, I got a cite, actually, plug the Weekly Standard here. Fred Barnes has a piece in this current issue exactly along these lines, and the way that he frames the issue is that, the coalition party, which, as you point out, has been the Democratic Party over the past, say, 20 years almost now, the coalition party and the consensus party, which typically has been the Republican Party in recent memory, they've switched places, and of course, that's created all these different dynamics electorally. I do think, in the end, John McCain's conservative problem is being exaggerated by the media. By the conservative media, you mean? Yeah, well, no, but also the liberal media, loves the story because it plays up conflict. And it also kind of shows conservatives being out of touch with political reality. So I think both the conservative media and the non-conservative media, whatever you call it, it loves this story, and we'll keep it going. But at the end of the day, if these voters have a problem with John McCain, there's no way that they're going to vote for Barack Obama once we have a big general election campaign.
Well, to me, the interesting issue is really going to be the defining issue. I think it's still going to end up being Iraq. People say it's starting to be the economy, but the clearest difference between the two will be what they do on Iraq. And right now, that political debate has been somewhat muted because in each presidential primary contest, by and large, there has been consensus. You have Ron Paul on the Republican side, but all the leading Republicans basically wanted to pursue the current status quo policies, and all the Democrats, as I said earlier, want to withdraw. Now, that's going to become a big issue, I think, in the fall, or even before the fall, as soon as a Democrat is chosen. And it's going to be very hard for voters who are going to presumably feel strongly one way or the other to vote against that strong feeling for the other candidate. Now, I think right now that still puts John McCain in a difficult situation because most polls still show the war to be a mistake. Now, a lot of Americans, want to see the war end. They may not want to see the war end in a way that people will depict as surrender or retreat. But I think more of them want to sort of are lean towards the get out than stay in position, regardless of what's happened in the last year. John McCain, in fact, today, when we're talking, was quoted in AP as saying, if I can't convince the public that Iraq is, that our policy in Iraq is right and we're going to win, I'm going to lose. And as soon as he said that, he tried to backtrack and say, well, I didn't mean to put it so strongly, but I think he kind of has that right.
Yeah, I mean, he has. I think he has it right as well. There's one thing that McCain's candidacy does, which is, I think, gives him a slight advantage, and that is, you mentioned the public basically saying the war was a mistake, and all the polling seems to show that. But on the question going forward, public opinion remains relatively ambivalent when you actually divide it into these subgroups about, what do you want the troops out immediately? People favor a timetable, but what does that mean? Is the timetable 6 months, is it a year, or what? Or do you want to see things improve? Then you start getting a small,
But if you ask them, would you like to stay there for another 100 years?
Right. but that's. I mean, John McCain's point there has been misrepresented.
Story. I know the point. I'll tell you a little anecdote here. I was at that town hall meeting, and I heard him say that. And he said, it's fine for me if we stay there for 100 years if American casualties are going down. Was his point if things are on a positive trend line. I heard that, though, and it still struck me as a pretty stark remark, and I went up to him afterwards. I've known him for 20 years, and you do this with politicians. You give them the benefit of the doubt sometimes. I said, right. You just said it'd be fine by you if we stay there for 100 years. Was that just your way of saying we should stay there until we get the job done? Was that an expression? What did you mean by that? He says, well, I meant it, 100 years. I said, 100 years? He goes, I'll make it 1,000 years. I said, 1,000 years? He goes, make it 1,000,000 years.
Right,
I mean, his point is Bosnia, we're there, Korea, Japan.
Germany, Japan.
I would make the argument, though, that those are different cases, and to tell the rest of the world now that we envision staying in Iraq for 100 to 1,000 years is not the message to be sending.
Well, probably not when you put it in those terms. If you put it in different terms, if you say America's commitment to a stable Middle East, and a democratic Middle East, or at least a democratic Iraq, is such that we're going to do everything we can, over the next generation or the next century, then that might be slightly more appealing in argument. I mean, these things all come down to phrasing. Right. Here's the point, though, which is that McCain can change the argument to be one where it used to be whether we were fighting, whether it was a mistake or not to go in. I think that was kind of the 2004 question of the 2004 campaign. Was it a mistake to go in? And, Bush lost Iraq. I mean, he gained big on terrorism when you look at the exit polling in 2004. With McCain in 2008, the question is, what do we do going forward? And here's actually something where McCain's policy advocacy in the past gives him, kind of some ammo up against Barack Obama, because he can say, listen, you can trust my judgment. I looked at the situation in the summer of 2003. I called for more troops and a counterinsurgency strategy. Then the Bush administration took 4 years to adopt that strategy, and now we're actually in a place where all the trend lines on violence are going down, where the parliament, they're finally seeing some national reconciliation, where we're probably going to have provincial elections, which will allow the Sunnis to buy into the process.
Well, a lot of this will depend on what's happening in September, October, November of this year.
Right.
And, that's an argument he'll have a better time making if things are actually going well then. We've seen suicide bombings go up recently, and, the Iraqi parliament, it seems that we're always a day away from total collapse, although they've passed a few bills, although they haven't been worked out, the details. But, I mean, I think he will be held hostage to the reality of on the ground and how many troops we have there too. I mean, right now, Bush is, the surge is not, it's wrong to call it a surge. The surge is not a surge. The surge was an escalation. We put more troops in, and that level is staying up. And while there was talk of the troop level going down by the summer, we have the generals now saying, we like this level of troops. We like a higher level of troops. So, we're not moving in the direction of fewer troops, which is how Bush contextualize the surge, put more in so we can take more out. We're just have more troops. And at some point, the American public might be just fine with that, but at some point they might say, well, wait a second. This surge is the longest surge we've ever seen. What's going on with this? It's not a surge. I mean, and he'll be left having to, justify that final misrepresentation of the Bush campaign. But I want to ask you one other thing about McCain, because you've written a lot about lobbyists. Right?
Right.
I wrote
a book
about it. We're plugging your book here, which was called
The K Street Gang. The Rise and Fall of the Republican Machine.
Yes.
And McCain was a hero in that book.
McCain is a hero in that book.
That's right.
Actually, you're one of the few conservative journalists out there who pay a lot of attention to this. And so we haven't talked yet about the McCain New York Times story, and
Sure.
I was just curious what you made of it.
Well, I read the story. This is a 3,000-word story. I thought that they contained, basically I thought what almost everybody else thought about it. What was the, where's the beef to translate, a phrase that's being used a lot in the Democratic race now. What are the actual allegations? It seems to me that there is a big debate about McCain's relationship with Paxson and that whole situation here. I just don't know whether McCain can be attacked on the lobbying issue. Barack Obama is going to try to do it. There's no question about that. Obama is really, if you listen to Obama, he thinks the greatest threat to American democracy are lobbyists, the way he talks about them. And McCain, of course, is much more comfortable around lobbyists.
They're running his campaign. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Rick Davis is a lobbyist.
And the funny thing was, in the course of defending all this, Charlie Black was out there, and every story about him says he represents a lot of big companies, and they always give one or two examples: AT&T, IBM, whatever they may be. And what we at Mother Jones did was list his entire roster of clients, and it's I don't know if we've got over 100 or so corporations, but he's making tens and maybe $50 million or more, and he's out there saying McCain doesn't have a lobbyist problem. Well, I would expect Charlie Black to say exactly that.
Well, here's one point I did make in the K Street Gang, which is that there's a difference between having a lobbyist problem and having a corruption problem. And the Republican Party had a corruption problem in 2006, and indeed it had it in 2007 when Renzi's indictment just in the past week or so. It has it in 2008 too. The corruption problem is what is the big deal for the Republican Party, and that's something that John McCain doesn't have as of now. For all the report, I don't think that New York Times story showed a corruption problem on the part of McCain. It did show that there are a lot of lobbyists involved, and there is a lobbyist problem, I think, in Washington, D.C. There are too many of them, and we have a system of campaign finance regulations that only increase their power and numbers, but at which, incidentally, McCain is kind of responsible for, with McCain-Feingold and stuff, and not getting to a more simplified campaign finance regime. So the lobbying problem, different from the corruption problem. Right now, he doesn't have a corruption problem. I don't think he will at the end. That's probably my hope more than anything else. And based on some evidence and knowing him as well, he won't have one. But a lobbying problem, Obama will make it an issue. We'll see if it's a winning one.
You're a couple years younger than I am, and
just a couple.
How well you remember the 2000 campaign? But back then, he talked about the iron triangle between lobbyists, legislators, and campaign fundraising, and he didn't. And he talked about, actually, in terms that I respect at the time, of the institutional corruption, not the illegal corruption that we see Renzi or Abramoff being nailed for. Renzi, we should say, who has been indicted, not found guilty yet, but it was that institutional corruption issue, which is something that I've have cared about for a number of years, and. It seems to me if you make that critique, which he was free not to make, but if you make that critique, but then you surround yourself with these lobbyists whose job it is to game the system for the advantage of the people who can afford to pay them, and not do necessarily what's in the public interest of citizens out there, you do put yourself at risk of being charged not with corruption itself, but a certain degree of hypocrisy. And I think that that would be a fair point for Obama, Clinton, or anybody else to raise against him. You really say that lobbyists are institutionally a problem. Your political career is dependent upon them, and you have and you don't distance yourself from them.
Yeah, that's an argument that's worked, it seems to me, pretty well in the Democratic primary. I'm not sure whether it's going to. It seems to me the Democrats are really, their strategy now, if you look at them going after the lobbyist issue, they're going after the campaign finance, public financing issue, it seems to me a lot of Democratic strategists are saying the way that we're going to tackle John McCain is by making him look like a hypocrite. And tying him to Bush. So it's a two-pronged strategy. One, making him look like a hypocrite. He's not the straight talker. He's part of the Washington institutional problems that everyone seems to dislike at the moment. And the other strategy is he's Bush's third term. I think both of those are actually not going to work very well. The Bush third term one is pretty easy, just because there's so many issues on which he disagrees with George W. Bush, and of course his own personal style, his personal biography is so different than George W. Bush's.
Well, I would add to that a third point of attack: no country for old men. I've seen him on the campaign trail. And I just have questions how well he's going to manage by the time November rolls around. But as I said earlier, I think Iraq is going to end up defining this campaign and this election much more than it has now, and that will be an events beyond both candidates' control will shape that. I mean, I thought on the New York Times story, to me the interesting thing was if you took sex out of the equation. And there was no allegation of sex, although there was they clearly had spoken to people close to McCain who had wondered about his relationship with this woman, Vicky Eisman, a lobbyist for Paxson, the telecommunications company. If you took that and put it to the side, there was still a troubling issue. If he was doing a favor for a firm, and he was sort of socializing, which he was, it seemed, in a very close way with the lobbyist for that firm, whether or not the two were doing it, but they were traveling together, going to social events together. It seemed to me the campaign people were right to say, well, wait a second, this could look bad for us, and if they're sleeping together, it could look even worse for us. And the fact that the guy who's the scourge of lobbyists, supposedly, and of campaign finance sleaze in Washington, if his own campaign is trying to protect him on that front. Seems to me that's a story. I think in some ways, the Times got bashed because it followed what it was being told about the worries and suspicions of the campaign advisors about the nature of the relationship. And if it kind of put that aside and just said they were really, 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 really good friends, people would have had less to get mad about.
Or they might not have even, could have just said straight up factual reporting. Look, he showed up with this lobbyist in a lot of places. Yeah. Advisors went to the lobbyist. One advisor went to the lobbyist to say, we'd like you to stop hanging around him, allegedly. Yeah, absolutely, they did it. But the words romantic relationship appeared in the story, and so that colored everything that came out of it. And, I think that's analytically a really good point. Well, let's spend some time, though, talking about the Democratic side,
right.
And Barack Obama. And
does he scare conservatives at all? Or do you think he's has a glass jar and can be put down easily?
It's been fascinating to watch conservative reaction to Barack Obama. I remember in 2007, I even wrote a piece that was unpublished, actually, talking about Republicans loving Obama. Even then, right around, it was April 2007, Bob Kagan had a column in the Washington Post, Obama the Hawk, which I still recommend reading just to contrast Obama then with Obama now. Mm-hmm. And then the London Times of London had an article about Barack Obama's Republicans, some Bush advisors, former Bush advisors, saying great things about him. Now that opinion, there's still some of that opinion left. Pete Wehner, about a month ago, had a piece kind of about Republicans who love Obama in the Washington Post. But I feel slightly it's starting to change now as the likelihood of Obama becoming the Democratic nominee for president increases.
Oh, you liked him when he didn't have a shot at it, is that?
Well, they liked him for one reason. I think if you ask
the liberals liked McCain when he didn't, when he was on the outs.
Right. Well, they liked him for, I think, one central reason. I mean, they talked something about the rhetoric as well. People do like that, the idea of that we are one America. I mean, that appeals to everybody.
Yeah.
What I think they really liked about Barack Obama, and which they'll continue to like about Barack Obama for the next between 1 week or 5 weeks through Pennsylvania, is that he will finally close the book on the Clintons. And that was more than anything, I think, driving this.
I mean, was it Stalin or Lenin who came up with the phrase "useful idiot"?
Right. Exactly.
So he's doing the right wing's dirty work for it. He's
right. I mean, when you have to,
he's exercising the Clinton curse in the American political body.
Something that conservatives were never able to do.
No, in fact,
they weren't able to do it in '92. They weren't able to do it in '96. They weren't able to do it in '98 with impeachment.
They couldn't stop
in '99.
They couldn't stop her in New York State.
Didn't stop her in New York State. So for Barack Obama to do that, I think there has been a lot of Schadenfreude on the part of conservatives here. Now, once he does that, which
be careful what you wish for, right?
Exactly, they're going to have to figure out a way to deal with Barack Obama. Now, a lot of people haven't been paying attention to him, to what he's actually saying at this point. And Steve Hayes, my colleague, has a piece in the Journal today saying, if you go back to 1980, a lot of liberals dismissed what Ronald Reagan was saying. And in fact, I think the parallel is true.
Well, I've been saying this for some time now. I think, I think voters react to candidates on a couple of different levels, and they evaluate different aspects. Some care about some voters are position or ideologically driven, and they want people whose positions line up with theirs, and that's the most important thing. And you see that, as we've noted, on the Republican side with McCain and some parts of the Republican base. And then there are others who sort of look at what you might call in general leadership qualities, intelligence, integrity, authenticity, strength, whatever they perceive, and if they can live with the positions, or they're not put off by the positions, or they don't care about the positions, that's what motivates their choice. And I think what Reagan did, a lot of liberals, looked at, or I would say not liberals, some moderates looked at Reagan in the 80s, and they considered him rather strong. Liberals looked at him and said, "How can anyone with this set of principles make it to the White House? He's just too far right. The public won't go for that." But the public reacted, I think far more to his presentation, his manner, his strength, his hopeful rhetoric, which is very uplifting, and his ability to connect with them. And I think, and because he had those talents, he was able to bring his conservative agenda and conservative friends into government, and was able to do battle with Tip O'Neill and win on a lot of fronts. The question is, does Obama have that same fortitude, that same connection that will allow him to sort of come in because people trust him, like him, feel he's a strong leader, can unite the country, and then use the support that he inspires to put forward what would be a more liberal agenda and get that through which would presumably be a Democratic Congress. That's sort of the work. Reagan is kind of the working model for what might be an Obama presidency.
There's one difference here, and that is John McCain, who's come up a lot in this conversation. I don't think anyone could argue McCain is Jimmy Carter.
No, that's true, but Obama doesn't have to have the margin of victory that Ronald Reagan had in 1980 to win.
Well, of course, in Ronald Reagan's margin of victory was only about 51, I think. It was relatively close in 1980. People tend to forget that because they look at the 84 landslide.
Right.
But in 1980 was a closely fought election.
Well, it was actually until the last month, particularly too. According to polls, Carter was up for a long time, and then Reagan had a surge towards the end and passed by him.
What's striking to me, I wrote about this last week on our campaign blog. Well, it still existed, which is that. What's funny to me is we're always talking about, especially with Obama as the Democratic, perhaps the Democratic nominee, we're talking about turning the page on the Clinton-Bush era, moving on into a new politics, maybe a post-partisan politics, whatever. But it does seem to me that the kind of, the issues that are going to be important in this campaign, and I absolutely agree with you that Iraq will be more important an issue than people are saying at the moment, about a whole host of issues, whether it's Iraq or, Iran. I think Iran will probably be less of an issue in the campaign because of the NIE, but so whether it's Iraq or whether it's the war on terrorism, and all the kind of legal and military policies that flow from that concept, whether it's judges, McCain's never kind of adopted the judicial issue, but the fact remains that there's a clear distinction between him on the life issues, for example, with Obama. So those three issues right there are basically the same things that we have been arguing about. Not you and me personally, that we argue about it from time to time, but the country's been arguing about for 20, 25 years, even longer. So the question for me, though, and to put it to you, is, Republicans have won a lot of those battles in the past, and so I think that the issues here may help the GOP slightly, because there's no doubt Obama is to the left of the country, I think, on some of these issues. Would you agree or no?
Well, I mean, I don't think he is on the war.
Right.
I think, in terms, if McCain adopts the GOP platform, which is criminalizing all abortion, that's not, the country's not there. Certainly they have mixed feelings, but if you put them to start question, legal or illegal, they go with legal. So if he, so it depends how far he's pushed on that issue. And when it comes to judges, I don't think that's an issue that's only been an issue, I think, for the respective bases of the, not for people in the middle. So I think, I think on all these fronts, I agree with you. These issues aren't going away, and they can't be papered over because they're foundational. And they're important issues, and we should have vigorous debates over it. The question is that usually the people who feel strongly about these issues fall to one side or the other, and their votes are pretty well taken for granted by the two parties. And so the question is, how does this play on those within the middle, whether they're independents or moderates or just people who have no affiliation? And that's where I think, I talked about earlier, the way a candidate, presents him or herself to the public counts for so much. I would be stunned if you could show me any poll from 1980 showing that America, wanted a president who would outlaw abortion. But yet they voted for Reagan and then voted for him quite, in much larger numbers, as you noted, in '84. Had he actually outlawed abortion or succeeded in doing so, he may not have won in '84. But that was not what drove the deciding in the middle block of voters. So I think on all those issues, the Democrats, Obama, can fight at least to a draw, if not win on some. And Iraq is the open question that will be determined by what's happening on the ground then. And then, it really becomes, I think, a battle. I think the presidency, more than any other contest in our political system, is a battle between two people. And what people feel and think about them. And McCain, Obama, we keep talking about that as if it's a done deal. But let's just continue on that, on that.
Let's assume for the purposes of this dialogue.
I will say that I spoke to a very, very prominent, almost household name Clinton supporter a couple of days ago, and he was talking about the campaign in the past tense. I said, "You realize what you're doing with all your verbs here?" He said, "Oops, I probably shouldn't be doing that yet." And there's a lot of pessimism there. But anyway, a face-off pairing McCain and Obama, you have the biggest age difference ever. I think McCain, I was told this, I haven't checked it out, has children from his first marriage who are older than Barack Obama. But one of the biggest age gaps ever. And, certainly, very different life stories, very, different colors, different cultural touchstones. And it will be, it'll be fascinating to see these two guys debate one another, how they structure their campaigns, and what ends up working or not working for each. It's almost like you're setting up this grand political exercise.
It is. I think we've just to close here. I think we've hit upon kind of the political equivalent of Nietzsche's, cycle of the eternal return. We no matter how far we want to get ahead, John Judas says this cover story in the New Republic this week about the fad of the new in American life. Right. We always want the new thing, but at the end of the day, I think we always return to the same old argument.
Well, I think so too. I mean, I remember Gary Hart and the whole thing about new ideas, and now we talk about new ideas in this campaign. There are some new ideas. We have new ideas about global warming because we didn't have global warming 30 years ago. Might have, but we didn't recognize it. But by and large, a lot of the things that we argue about, whether it's about taxes, whether it's about how to our position, our place in the world, those things don't change. Now, public attitudes shift back and forth, probably driven by circumstances, and Israel's a good example too, where they go back between a dovish and hawkish response in the public there towards what should be done regarding the Palestinians, and we go through our cycles in this country, but we're still Social Security was passed by FDR, over 50 years ago, 6 years ago, and we still argue about it. And we're going to continue to argue about these things. But I think, setting up an Obama-McCain race I think will be one of the most fascinating. Putting aside what would be best for the country, and we all want that, although you and I disagree on what would be best, it would just be a fascinating political experiment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I look forward to talking to you about it in the future, David. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll see you soon, Matt.
Yep, take care.
Bye.